Hi, I'm Pauline at the Reach Museum in Richland, Washington. I'm here in the galleries and just remembering that it was just over 200 years ago that these two, Lewis and Clark, and their group of explorers first arrived at the confluence of the Snake and Columbia rivers not too far from here. Now they were on a mission to find a route to the Pacific Ocean and to record as much information as they could about that route and the people they met along the way. The journey lasted almost 2.5 years, and they traveled about 8,000 miles. So in order to make sure that they didn't forget any important information, Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, John Ordway, Patrick Gass, Joseph Whitehouse, and Charles Floyd all recorded information in their journals. Some of these men wrote entries nearly every single day of their journey. They wrote about where they were and what they saw. They took measurements and made maps of the places that they were. They drew pictures of the animals that they saw, and they pressed samples of plants to take back with them. All of this information adds up to a really great picture of what the Columbia River was like 200 years ago. Do you like to journal? Now that's not the same as keeping a diary, but it's similar. A diary is meant for personal reflection, and you can choose whether or not to share it with anyone. But a journal is meant to be shared with people, and it contains observations and records of events so that people can learn about what you have experienced. For instance, this entry that Clark wrote on October 17th, 1805. Now, while the rest of the party stayed at the mouth of the Snake River, where Sacagawea State Park is now, Clark took 2 other men and a canoe, and they paddled up the Columbia River about 10 miles. They came to an island near the mouth of the Yakima River. I think this could be Bateman Island, just right outside of our museum. He writes that they saw huge quantities of salmon. Many of them were dead and had washed up on the shore. People were picking them up and laying them out to dry on scaffolds outside of their house. Their houses were made of mats that were sewn together with tule reeds, which grew in the water nearby. He writes that they saw no trees anywhere nearby, just a few small willows growing along the edge of the water. The water was clear, and they could see salmon all the way down to nearly 20 feet. They also saw a lot of a particular bird. The hunters killed one, and later Clark drew a picture of it. He wrote that this was like a small turkey or pheasant, and it ate grasshoppers and fed on a shrub that they didn't know the name of because they didn't recognize, but I think might have been sagebrush. Now this bird is likely a sage grouse, which is now much, much harder to find, but he said that they saw lots of them. Does this sound like what the Tri-Cities looks like now? A lot can change in 200 years. Now these days, if we go on a trip and we want to remember everything, we take a lot of photos along the way. But journaling is more than that. Journaling is a way to slow down and notice more detail. It's a practice in not only noticing those details, but also recording them so that someone else can better understand them. And it takes practice, close observations, and learning the skills to render those details in words and in pictures. So let's practice it together because it's also a lot of fun. All you need is something to write on. I'm going to use this blank book that I made, which I use for nature journaling. And you need something to write with. Oh, actually, I think I'm going to use a pencil. Oh, and you need something interesting to journal about. Now you can stop the video and step outside. The first interesting thing that grabs your attention, that's what you can journal about. and then bring it back if you can, or just bring your journal outside and make your observations there. I'm going to journal about this interesting piece of snakeskin that I found outside. Okay, let's get started. Choose a page, and there are 3 phrases that I would like you to copy. But first, let's start with what we always start with when we're journaling, the date and the time, and the location. Okay, these are all important things because they can have an effect on what you're observing. Date, time, and location. Some people like to also include some observations about the weather. That's up to you. I like to put them at the top of the page, but you can choose where you put them. All right, 3 phrases to copy. The first one is I notice. Let's put that one at the top. I notice. And leave plenty of room for what you're going to notice. The second phrase after I notice is I wonder. I wonder. And the third phrase is it reminds me of. It reminds me of. Many people use these 3 phrases to help them get started with nature journaling, and you can use them anytime you journal. Always start with I notice, and that's where you put all the details that you notice about your interesting thing. Some people are more comfortable using words, and some people are more comfortable with drawing, but I would like you to try using both. Start with your favorite and then add in the other one. At first it might feel a little awkward, especially if you're not used to drawing, but it will get easier with practice, I promise. The important thing here is to make sure that you are writing and drawing like a scientist. That means draw and write exactly what you notice, what you observe. Don't worry about making it look pretty. You can take that drawing and later go back and redo it to make it into a piece of art if you like. But for right now, while you have that object in hand, just draw and write like a scientist. Now, scientists often use numbers too, so in addition to words and pictures, try to add in some numbers. For instance, you could include measurements like Clark did in his journal entry when he was writing about the sage grouse. He wrote, it measured from the beak to the end of the toe 2 feet 6 3/4 inches. He was obviously using some kind of tool to measure what he had. All right, so as you are noticing and writing down and drawing and putting numbers about what you notice, you are going to think of some questions. It always happens. For instance, with my snakeskin here, I'm wondering, why does it feel the way it does? What is this part for right here? And where did this even come from? These are all things that you record under I wonder. For now, you're just going to record those mysteries and questions, and later you can go back and do some research to find the answers to them. This is how a lot of scientific studies and experiments get started. All right, and then what does it remind you of? What connections can you make to something that you have seen before? Or what does it resemble? So now this can help you make connections to some kind of phenomena that you've experienced before. Your results to this part can be some great discovery, or it can turn into some creative piece of writing like a poem. Now that's not something that you'll find in Lewis and Clark's journals, but in nature journaling, it can be an important part of your practice. Just think of how a piece of poetry can really capture the essence of something and help you remember it better later because it connects to your emotions. All right, your journaling practice can be as easy as doing these 3 phrases once every day. but it's always going to be about whatever is interesting to you or whatever you want to know more about. I hope you get started with some nature journaling, and maybe someday your journal observations could be as important to history as Lewis and Clark's.